So let's get started. So just a welcome, and by way of introduction, I'm Andy Jack, and I'm one of the co-founders of Candle Digital. Now, we work with a whole heap of range of different subject experts, so coaches, consultants, authors, speakers and trainers like Martin, and we help them take their expertise online, usually in the form of online courses and academies. We're big believers in the power of online learning to build new skills, create positive habits, and ultimately help people transform their respective situations. And we also have Martin on the call. And Martin, let you introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, Martin Mellor from Mellor Financial. I support businesses and help business owners better understand finance in the context of their business, and I do that through an outsourced finance director service, but also more specifically for the purpose of this conversation through training courses to help people with their confidence in relation to all things financial in a business context.
Okay, great. So thanks, Martin. So just a little caveat before we start. So we're not experts in ChatGPT, generative AI, or large language models by any means. And there are people and organizations out there who live and breathe this stuff. If anyone's really interested in this area and wants to look at the wider use cases around ChatGPT, there was a great talk from CAI yesterday that was part of the Leeds Digital Festival. So if you can get hold of the recording, I would recommend checking that out. But we've seen that there's lots of talk about using ChatGPT and generative AI in the education space, but we haven't seen a lot of action. And Martin and I have been experimenting in this space and had some interesting results. So we wanted to, on today's talk, just explain a little bit about what we've done, what we've learned, the things that we got wrong, and basically share those lessons that we've acquired over the last, 6 months. So if you want to learn more, stick around. Martin, do you want to give a quick overview of your online training?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Andy. So the training that we run is predominantly designed for people that are not accountants, that are not people with a financial skill set. So it's really aimed to break down lots of the complexity that exists in terms of language, terminology, how things fit together. We're big believers that you don't know what you don't know. And yet there is almost a presumed level of knowledge and understanding when it comes to finance. And most people, whether they start a business or whether they're a manager in a business or they're on their career path or their career journey, you just can't avoid it. Sadly, you need an understanding of finance. And we're firm believers that an awful lot of the training that's out there, and to be frank, there is an awful lot of it, is really quite lazy. And so started working with Andy and Candle about 4 years ago now with a view to doing something a little bit different. And so we worked with them to build a hub, an online learning tool, and actually where we're seeing real traction with this and the specific way in which we've rolled out this ChatGPT trial is in what we call a hybrid version of that. So you'll see on screen there a screenshot of content that's been broken down, staged. We walk people through that process, hold their hand. We combine some live online sessions with self-paced study. That gives them loads of opportunity to feel confident. And a big part of that is reinforcing that learning with exercises, with scenarios, with conversations, because what we want it to be is impactful in a real world sense. And so that's the product that we have, and that's what we've been working with. And fundamentally, we're always looking to make it better, hence this trial.
Thanks, Martin. And so if the aim of Martin's course is to be able to have confidence around finance and be able to have a productive conversation about finance, then we as learning designers needed to be able to provide the ability and space for learners to practice. You know, whoever we're working with in our course designs, we're constantly thinking about how we can build opportunities for practice, opportunities for feedback and reflection, because we see these as the fundamental aspects of creating an educational experience that has impact, really. And until recently, our options to provide this in a self-study or blended format have been quite limited. And Martin's course is designed around 5 specific key personas. So we try and help people walk in the shoes of different types of business owners. So we've got a chap that's setting up a it's a mobile coffee shop, all the way to someone that works in a PLC. And what we're trying to do is expose people to different types and sizes of business and different ways that they talk about finance. And one of those scenarios or avatars is the finance manager. So when a learner is going through the course, we position this finance manager as their employer, in essence. And to try and bring in practice elements, when we first started designing the course several years ago, we had to resort to standard quiz functionality to try and replicate a conversation. And naturally, this has some real limitations, particularly around the feel and flow of an actual conversation and how that occurs, but also the fact that it's quite binary, it's quite linear, it's either right or wrong. But at the time when we were designing this, it was the best tool at our disposal when we were creating this. And then ChatGPT came along. And like many of us early in the year, around springtime, when ChatGPT was perhaps at the height of its hype cycle, we were at Candle Digital, we were thinking about two things, really. It was, how can we weave ChatGPT and other generative AI tools into our business activities to make us leaner, more productive, more efficient, more creative, perhaps? But also, how can we bake this technology into our clients' learning experiences to enhance what they do? And naturally, ChatGPT's core interface is one of a conversation. So our thinking was, can we use its power, its chat-based simulations, to help people increase their understanding and develop new capabilities? And given Martin's course, we'd already tried to do this in some ways, it seemed like a good opportunity to try it. And thankfully, he was open to us using his course as the guinea pig. So we started the process. And just to warn him, I'm going to get a little bit technical now. Now, I'm not the technical half of Candle Digital, but I've been given some very good notes from Mark, our technical director. But the three stages we went through, the first thing we did was we signed up for an API key. So obviously an API being the interface between Martin's learning platform and ChatGPT. So the first step we did was sign up for an API key, which can be done on the OpenAI website. And once you have that key, you can start using the API with any programming language that supports HTTP requests. So Martin's platform is based on WordPress, using LearnDash to give it some learning management capabilities. And so we started developing it using PHP, and we found a really simple PHP script on GitHub that we used to create a basic scenario. Then we had to create the interface. So we wanted people to, as they go through the course in the learning management system, to be able presented with an interface that they can have a dialogue with the finance manager, but where ChatGPT is acting as the finance manager. And we felt that user-friendly interface was crucial, and it would greatly affect the learning experience. So we used HTML and CSS for the front-end aesthetics, and we used PHP for the back-end functionality. I'm also told by Mark, our technical director, that we used jQuery to create an interactive interface and allow it to use Ajax for communication with the API. So by using Ajax, we were able to send and receive data from the API without having to reload the entire page, and this allowed for a smoother conversation flow. So once we got those two elements, then the challenge was to create the prompt. So we really wanted to create a flowing dialogue where ChatGPT, as I've said, is acting as the finance manager. So it was critical that the tool could understand and reference the learner's previous responses as that dialogue continues and as it develops. Without it, it would keep asking the same questions. So one thing we learned quite early was that the ChatGPT API does not technically store conversations. So that means if you want it to understand your previous responses, you need to pass the entire conversation history back and forth with every API request. So initially, our concern was around the load and the amount of tokens, which is the cost associated with using the ChatGPT AI, and that would increase significantly as more of the conversation was being passed back and forth. However, after we tested that quite significantly, we found that we'd only spent about 6 cents worth of tokens. So from our perspective, it was a worthwhile investment and something that's worth continuing with. So we ended up with something like this that you can see on screen. And as I say, this loads once you get to a certain relevant part of the course. So Karen is the finance manager, and that is in essence ChatGPT. So ChatGPT starts the conversation with the prompt working in the background. And if in this example, we can see an initial question there, which the student can respond to, which is the response in black. And we can see that Karen responds with a correction and more detail, but also looks for clarification that the person doesn't require any more information on that. So this dialogue is going backwards and forwards on the actual screen in the learning management system. And as the conversation continues, in this example above, we provided a purposefully misleading answer. Now, ChatGPT tries to intervene and correct that and provide further information. So these are the kind of scenarios that we were creating for various different contexts, but all largely followed this format. Once we created that, then Martin piloted that with a small group of course participants. I think it was about 20, wasn't it, Martin?
That's right. Yeah.
And it was in an organisation Martin had already worked with, and we got some great feedback. So, Martin, do you want to share the feedback that we had?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So we conducted a survey, and these were all people that had been through the course in its existing guise. So they'd all been through it with that quiz functionality that Andy mentioned. The scores on the left-hand side are all out of 10. We asked people to score out of 10. So firstly, how useful are the scenarios? Secondly, how enjoyable was it? Third, how easy was the interface to use? How realistic was the dialogue? And how likely are you to recommend this type of practice exercise to a friend? And I think it's really interesting that that's the one that got the best response. As you can see, the lowest response overall was about 8.5 out of 10. So we were really pretty pleased with that feedback for the initial people to try it, and to be getting scores of 9+, 9.5+ out of 10 for how likely people are to recommend it and how useful it is. That really feels like it's given us something to take forward and something to work with. And there's just some verbatims there on the right-hand side. So one person said they thought it was a brilliant resource. Another person was impressed with the questions and the responses. And like what was really music to our ears, I guess, is the one where it says that it was a much better way of testing learning than the multiple choice questions that we've been using up to now. So, you know, if the point of the exercise was to test out, could this add value to our course? The answer was definitively yes. You know, this was really positive feedback. People had willingly engaged with it, and they were all pretty positive in their responses.
Okay, thanks, Martin. I think, and our plan really is now to refine it further, isn't it, Martin? So I look for a larger pilot, yeah. So we want to do a larger pilot. A couple of reasons, really. I mean, first of all, there's a number of kinks that are still in there. It's quite erratic, and I'm going to talk through what those are and the things that we've got to work through. But we also want to try and measure retention of information. I mean, this is a happy sheet. You know, it's great feedback, and I think it shows that we're on the right track with this stuff. But we want to try and do some A/B testing around retention of information for those that have done this tool and those that haven't, and do that over a lengthy period of time. So that's something we're quite excited about. But as I say, there are still a number of kinks we still need to weed out before we can go to baking this into the program as core. And if I can bring up the next slide. So this is an example of what appeared at the start. And a lot of this comes down to the challenge in devising the prompt. Initially, ChatGPT would spew out a load of answers like this. And so it took a lot of time to actually craft the prompt that's going to power it. And we ended up using a prompt like this, as you can see on screen. And I know that in generative AI, there's a lot of talk about prompt engineers being a future career. And after our efforts at this, we can see why that's the case. So there are some key elements to what we've done here. So firstly, we really wanted to set the scene in the prompt. We wanted to provide ChatGPT with some background on what the user already knows, because we think that's quite important, obviously, being able to have a conversation that makes sense. We also provided some specific instructions on what ChatGPT should actually do. And we also wanted to provide some direction on the tone and how the conversation should kind of be navigated by ChatGPT, to make sure that it felt like it was the finance manager responding rather than a cold AI system. And I think ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to get ChatGPT to produce dynamic content that's relevant, that's useful, that's to the point, and in context. And we found that takes some crafting. And we still don't think we've got it spot on at all. And that took a lot of fine tuning just to get to this point. So I think interestingly now, some of the stuff we're starting to play with is you can use ChatGPT to help you actually craft your ChatGPT prompts, ironically. And there's a new beta inclusion which Mark, our technical director, is looking at called custom instructions. He hasn't played with that a lot yet, but that might be a useful tool to have a look at. In terms of the API, there's another value that you can play with called temperature. And this is a numerical value that gets sent with every API request. And that controls what we would say is the creativity of the response. So we really want to try and find that balance between generating interesting responses, but also one that would stay on topic. And we found as we were developing it that tweaking the temperature had an effect, but it wasn't a huge effect. What had the big impact on the output was really working hard on the prompt. Another challenge we had was speed, and that still is. So we're using version 3.5 Turbo, and we're on the version waiting list for version 4. So we see as we get that, what difference that makes to the conversations that are created by ChatGPT. But we'd see this a lot. So as each response is loading, it'd almost be difficult to know if it had crashed or not. The way we had to play around with something called max tokens, which controls how much text the API sends back and forth. The idea being that if it had less to generate, then it would output its response more quickly. But the biggest difference we did was actually changing some of the user interface. So we had an animated ... icon between the user input and the response, and that let it know that the system hadn't crashed, the application was doing something. So what I would say is that if you're thinking of doing this, do think about the user interface quite a lot, because that's had a big impact on some of the feedback that we've had. But given the positive pilot, we are looking to develop this further and see how we can kick on with it. From what we believe is quite a simple use case and implementation at this stage. So there are still a few challenges beyond the technical stuff that we are thinking about. One of those is that many of our clients that come to us, they have a big idea, an approach that's unique to them in what they teach and how they teach it. And so by its very nature, obviously ChatGPT is a large language model. It's using a huge corpus of material to help it create its output. And by its very nature, then it converges to the center ground. And what we found is can create quite vanilla answers. So with regards to the quite elementary stuff that Martin's teaching at the beginning of the course, it works quite well. But anything more complex or nuanced or specific to Martin's way of working may be more difficult for us to implement. So that's something we're playing with. We know there is something called embedding, where you can upload your own kind of text and data even to help with that. But that brings us on to another point, which is the third point there, which is actually around data, particularly if you're importing data into ChatGPT. So generative AI is going to be a really powerful, particularly if you're using, you could use it internally. So in a large organization, if you can bring your data into ChatGPT and use it to interrogate it and find and analyze information, but that comes with a huge blocker. And we know that for many heavily governed areas, particularly those in the public sector, they may be reticent to do that. So that's something we're thinking about, how we use it and who we can use it with. And finally, probably a last point on here is just the cultural norms. Using Martin's course as an example, a balance sheet is generally a balance sheet all around wherever you are in the world. But we're also aware that if that may not always be the case. So if you are thinking of using ChatGPT in this kind of circumstance for a global audience, something you have to be aware of is the local nuances. Now, I guess that's the case whether you're designing using ChatGPT or you're designing online learning anyway. But I think the difference is that with ChatGPT, you're not in control of the output. You can only steer it. So that's something just to be aware of as you go forward with this. But despite some of the blockers and some of the challenges we've had, we think there are huge educational opportunities in this space. And Martin and I have discussed about this quite a lot, but we think that we can't afford to be not working in this place and not working with this stuff, because we believe as time progresses, there's going to be an increasing divide between the super consumers and the super creators. And at the core of that is AI tools, and AI tools are going to put fuel on the fire. And if we're in an online education and we're not playing with this stuff, then we need to be fast. Otherwise, that gap could be that chasm could be quite difficult to cross at a future stage. So this is something we're keen to develop and continue to progress with. But as I said at the start, we are not experts in generative AI or using it in education by any means, but there are people that are out there. So some of you may have come across these people before. I'd recommend following them if you can. But Donald Clark, he's probably one of the biggest speakers and figures on artificial intelligence in learning. And Dr. Philippa Hardman, she's great specifically from an educational and perhaps a practical case as well. So if you go to Philippa Hardman's website and sign up for a newsletter, she's got some great prompts, what she calls mega prompts that you can use in a variety of different use cases. So I would recommend looking at her work and finding out a little bit more about that. And finally, I just wanted to make a mention of Chris Hodgson. So Chris Hodgson's a friend of ours, someone we work quite closely with, and he runs a company called Discover eLearning. Now, he does a lot around e-learning authoring tools. So you may have come across him if you're working in the Articulate space or Storyline space. And he's created some quite powerful immersive worlds using ChatGPT as dialogue within them. So I would certainly, if you have a look at what he does, and he's got some courses on there about specifically using generative AI and ChatGPT in education. So have a look at his stuff. But across all three, they are providing some practical use cases of this. So short and sweet, that's where we are. That's where we got to. So if anyone's interested in more of this, I'd love for you to connect with us on LinkedIn, either with myself or Martin. If you are a subject expert that wants to learn more about, can I take my expertise online? We do have a specific scorecard. If anyone has any questions about the technical details, then again, feel free to find them through to me either on here or through LinkedIn DM. And if I can't answer it, then I'll get our technical director to answer it. So a bit later than expected, but I hope that was useful. Hope you found that an interesting use case of ChatGPT in educational space, and we'd invite you to ask any questions you might have through the chat function. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. So Jeff and Gary have put a couple of comments in the chat, but unless I'm misreading them, they're not really questions, just more kind of endorsing the approach and the usability. But if anyone has got questions, then feel free to fire them in the chat and we'll try and curate them and answer them as best we can. Ali has asked you, Andy, you've been using 3.5. Are you using the 4.0 paid version as well?
Not yet. That's next on our list. So at the moment, we're strictly using 3.5. I think what we wanted to do is have a period of reflection and wait until the feedback came in. But our opportunity now is, having done a small pilot with 20, we want to grow that and do a pilot with, say 50 to 100. So we're now kind of thinking of our plans of how we do that and what opportunities that provides us with. And that's something that Mark, our technical director, is actively looking at.
Yeah. And then Emma's asking, she got here a little late. Will the recording be available afterwards?
Absolutely. So what we'll do is we'll take a recording of this, we'll stick it on YouTube, and we'll send it to everyone who joined the session.
And then Jason asks, how do you deal with hallucinations or the chatbot answering questions that it shouldn't be?
Interesting question. So I think it's like anything else. What we found is that it does happen, but it's almost you're trying to risk mitigation. You're trying to minimize the number of instances that happen. So when we first started, it was spewing out some random stuff, and it all came down to tweaking those different dials. So for example, the max tokens and the temperature are two that I'm aware of, but really kind of crafting that prompt, that's something we spent a lot of time working on, and I still don't think we've got it exactly right. But our next plan is to continue to do that. You are at the behest of ChatGPT. You aren't in control. So it's like anything else. You've created this little tool, this baby, really, and you're sending it out into the world. So it's a little bit scary. But I think what you can do is just trying to limit and minimize some of the risks. At this stage, what we've also done is provided the students with both options. So they do have the multiple choice option, and they do have the ChatGPT option. So as a bit of a fallback, the authoritative information is still in the course content that we've produced, and we're just positioning the ChatGPT as a more of a complementary piece until we can really whittle out some of those little bugbears.
Great, thank you. Gary makes the point that version 3.5 is perfectly adequate for most use cases and more cost effective. And then a follow-up question from Jason, having missed the beginning. Did you create it in the playground area? I missed how you created it.
Yeah, so I mean, it's covered a little bit in the start of the presentation, but we also do have a page with all the technical information of how we did it and a link to the PHP script that we used. But we basically used we got a token for the API and we created a PHP script behind the scenes that pulls information from ChatGPT and serves it up on screen.
And then question from Michael, do you think ChatGPT could handle reading a spreadsheet someone has written in to take them through doing the numbers?
Reading a spreadsheet someone has written in. Absolutely. Jeff says he's written some spreadsheet automation on Google Sheets. Took about 30 minutes. I think we're just at the, as I say, we're just exploring this thing, but the use cases are astronomical and the opportunities there are. I think it's trying to find the use cases that have the most relevance to the audience and from our perspective, what's going to really enhance the learning experience in a way that we can still control. So I think certainly we're still trying to get to grips with how generative AI and tools like ChatGPT can really help our own business at Candle Digital, and that's something we're exploring at the moment. But I see I really do feel that those people that get a handle on this and are using this stuff day in day out are going to have a massive advantage. There's a guy called Daniel Priestley, and he talks about you can run as fast as you can, but you'll always be taken over someone that's driving a car. You can run as fast as you can, but you'll never go and run as fast as someone that's driving a car. And that's how I see it with AI. All that's becoming is the Fiesta is becoming a Ferrari, and you can still run as fast as you can, but ultimately AI is going to be a bit of a not so secret weapon for people. So just get involved.
And then another one from Jason. How do you deal with your data security? Not much around IG as yet, so we have concerns about data safety.
Yeah, it's something we're actively thinking about, and at the moment, the user, the way we've set up the dialogue is that it doesn't actually know. It only actually knows that a user doesn't know them by name. It doesn't know any details about that person. It just knows them by a specific ID for that instance of that conversation. So we know that's going backwards and forwards, and that's probably the limit we're going to take it to at the moment, because obviously we were aware of some of the clients that we're going to be working with. They might have significant data security concerns as well, and so I think it's okay at the moment in terms of where we're at, but that's something we've got one eye on, because it's something that we really have to be aware of, and it's something that's really important. So I don't really have an answer for that, but it's just more something we're going to have to really keep an eye on, particularly as the use cases get more and more complex.
And then, Ali, do you feel like ChatGPT is a tool that is consistent? So, for example, does the same prompt in different browsers and on different days give the same response? Been using Google Bard more because I feel like it's more consistent, but I think it's not especially accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the pilot size was big enough to dive into that. I mean, the main pilot for us in terms of that was technically could they access it, and did they have any browser issues even just getting into it? So we weren't able to really check the kind of the comprehension of the responses and what the difference were in the different tech setups that people might have. But that's certainly something we'd like to look at as the pilot expands.
And then Jason says, more of a comment, but customer instructions are brilliant, by the way, makes such a difference.
Brilliant. Well, that's news it'd be good news for Mark. So I know Mark, our technical director, is getting stuck into that, and I feel that it feels like it's the next level, the next way to really ramp it up and make it do a lot more of what you want to do. So we're really excited by that. For those people that follow Seth Godin and get his newsletter, he had an email today which he had 20 things that he puts into, I think it's custom instructions, into ChatGPT, and it's making ChatGPT significantly more useful to him. So if you're looking at some examples of custom instructions, have a look at Seth Godin's email from today.
And Ali just says, thank you. This is wonderful. I hope you do a follow-up presentation to share how your work progresses and we can learn along with you.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I'd love to. So once we've done the next pilot, we'll come back, we'll feedback, and even if it's out of the Leeds Digital Festival cycle, we'll get in touch from everyone that's connected with us or has been on the attendance list, and we'll have to do it again, won't we, Martin?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, just to kind of add to what Andy's been saying, I definitely see this as an iterative thing that's got legs. I feel it as hard to say a differentiator, because I think, as Andy says, I think you either need to be on the bus or not. But I definitely think in my field, in my area, there's a lot of resistance to this kind of change. So I feel in being an early adopter, there's the potential to get ahead of the game, as it were. But we're constantly learning and we're constantly striving to improve. And what we are striving for is something that a lot of people have mentioned in the questions, which is the consistency of output. That's the crucial thing. You know, you don't want to say something that's not in the right tone or in the right tone of voice, or even picking something up from a space that I wouldn't necessarily agree with. So that's the crucial elements for me.
Fantastic. Well, if there's no more comments, then we'll say thank you for your attendance and really appreciate all your time and for listening in. Any questions that come along afterwards, feel free to, I'd say probably LinkedIn is the best way to get in touch. So feel free to drop us a LinkedIn DM, add to myself and Martin, and we'll get back to you. But thanks very much
Jason.
for your time. And yeah, thanks for all the comments as well, everyone.
Yeah.
And yeah, enjoy your Leeds Digital Festival.
Thanks, everyone.